Rejection is probably one of the most common emotional wounds we suffer in life. It's something we all go through, but we almost always underestimate just how much it hurts and the very real psychological damage it can cause. So let's kind of put on our lab coats today and diagnose what's really going on inside our heads when we feel rejected.
Just think about it for a second. We've all been there, right? Getting picked last for the team in gym class, getting ghosted after a date you thought went well, or, ouch, finding out your friends all got together and you weren't invited. These moments, they sting. And man, they can stick with us for way longer than we'd like to admit.
And there's a good reason for that. Rejection isn't just some fleeting bad mood. The best way to think about it is like a physical injury. Some rejections are like emotional paper cuts. They sting like crazy, but they don't do any major long-term damage. But others, they can be like deep gashes that need some serious care and attention. So, what's the deal? Why is the pain so intense? What is actually happening inside our brains that makes even a tiny little snub feel so awful? Well, the answer is absolutely fascinating, and it goes way, way back in our evolutionary history. To really get it, let's look at this classic psychology experiment. Just picture yourself in a waiting room, okay? There are two other people there. One of them picks up a ball, tosses it to the other person, who then kind of smiles and tosses it over to you. So far, so good. Everything's fine.
So you toss it back, and after maybe another pass or two, they just stop throwing it to you. They start passing it only between themselves, and you're just sitting there, completely left out. Now, your logical brain might be saying, who cares? It's a dumb game with two people I'll never see again.
But here's the wild part. When psychologists actually ran this experiment, people consistently reported feeling significant emotional pain. It didn't matter that the game was totally meaningless or that the people were strangers. The act of being excluded, even in this tiny, ridiculous way, genuinely hurt. This experiment just perfectly shows how incredibly sensitive we are to rejection.
So, why? Why do we care so much? Well, it all comes down to our brain's built-in early warning system. See, for our ancient ancestors, being kicked out of the tribe was a literal death sentence. It meant no food, no protection, no chance to find a mate. To stop that from happening, our brains evolved to trigger this sharp, intense pain at even the slightest hint of being pushed away. It's like a fire alarm screaming about a life or death emergency.
And this is where it gets really mind-blowing. When scientists put people in brain scanners, they found that the exact same regions of the brain light up when we experience social rejection as when we experience physical pain. Let that sink in. Your brain literally processes the pain of being ignored in the same way it would a punch to the gut. And if you need even more proof of this crazy connection, get this. Other studies found that giving people a standard dose of Tylenol before they did the ball tossing experiment actually reduced the emotional pain they felt. A physical pain reliever eased emotional hurt. That's just how deeply these two things are wired together in our brains. Okay, so now that we get the science behind why it stings so bad, we can start to diagnose the specific injuries that rejection causes. Just like a doctor would look for symptoms, we can pinpoint 4 really distinct psychological wounds that show up after we've been rejected. So when rejection hits, it tends to leave behind 4 main wounds. First, there's this overwhelming pain and confusion that just scrambles our ability to think straight. Second, a huge surge of anger and even aggression. Third, it's a direct hit to our self-worth. And finally, it threatens our most basic need to belong. Let's start with that first one. The first wound is that rejection pretty much rejects reason. The emotional pain is so intense that it actually messes with our ability to think clearly. I mean, in some follow-up experiments, people felt just as hurt even when they were told beforehand that the rejection was rigged, or, get this, that the people rejecting them were members of the KKK. It doesn't matter. Logic just can't touch that initial pain. All right, the second wound, anger. Rejection very often triggers these aggressive impulses. After being left out in those experiments, people were way more likely to do things like blast innocent bystanders with loud, awful noises, or even try to make them eat painfully spicy hot sauce. It creates this powerful and often totally misplaced urge to lash out at someone. And this isn't some small thing we can just brush off. The consequences can be absolutely devastating. Just think about this for a second. A 2001 report from the U.S. Surgeon General found that social rejection is a greater risk factor for adolescent violence than gang membership, poverty, or even drug use. That's how dangerous these wounds can be if they're left untreated. And then we have the third wound,
which is the massive blow to our self-esteem. As if getting rejected isn't bad enough, what's our immediate response? A lot of the time, it's to blame ourselves. We start making a list of all our faults, we get super self-critical, and we're basically just pouring salt directly into our own wounds. Take the story of a guy named Angelo. He lost his job after 20 years in a big company cutback. Now, logically, it wasn't personal, but to him, it felt like this deep, personal betrayal from people he thought were his friends. This sent him into a total spiral of self-doubt, convincing himself he was unwanted, and he started pushing away the very people who were trying to support him. And all of this leads us to the fourth and, honestly, the deepest wound of them all. This is the one that cuts right to the core of who we are as human beings, a threat to our fundamental need to belong. See, our need for acceptance and belonging, it's not a luxury. It's not just a nice to have. It is a basic psychological necessity, hardwired into us. And when that gets threatened by rejection, it doesn't just hurt our feelings. It completely destabilizes our sense of safety and our very identity in the world. And remember, this all goes back to survival. Being cast out of the group meant you were on your own. You were vulnerable, and you probably weren't going to make it. That ancient primal fear is still coded deep inside our DNA, which is why that threat to our sense of belonging feels so profoundly, well, terrifying. So here's the main thing to take away from all of this. The pain you feel from rejection, it's real. It's not all in your head, and you are not overreacting. It is a legitimate injury with clear, diagnosable symptoms. And just understanding that, just recognizing these wounds for what they are, that is the single most important first step you can take toward healing. So, now that we've diagnosed the injury, the big question is, what do we do about it? What's the treatment? Well, in our next explainer, we're going to open up the psychological first aid kit and walk through the real practical steps you can take to treat these wounds, soothe the pain, and actually start to heal.